bosses.
Good morning. Thanks for coming, everybody. See if you can find a seat. There's some. These are the high dollar seats over here. I think we have a seat for everybody who wants one. Yo, there's a few more seats. There's a few more chairs.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Have a seat. A few more chairs. Jonathan. Thanks for showing up, everyone. We have a good turnout. We'll be here till about 11 o'clock. We're going to have introductions from each of these gentlemen. I'll introduce them, and then you all decide who goes first. But we will, when you want to ask a question, please raise your hand and address it to the person you want to be addressing it to. State your name, please. And keep it civil. We've never had to have a policeman here yet. I think we never have to. I'm David Powell from the Holton Recorder. This is Allie, my associate. I'm going to introduce Representative Francis Auerkamp, St. Mary's. Francis says he has a back issue. He may stand the whole time because his back hurts. So if he's standing, that's just him.
Is there a chiropractor in the house?
Yeah, there's a few. Representative Sean Wilcott. Sean's first time addressing his constituents. We welcome him. Representative Ron Ellis. Raise your hand, Ron.
Yes, sir.
And first time also for Senator Craig Bowser to address us. There's Craig.
There's a few seats up front here.
So without further ado, I'll just let you start down the aisle here and talk about what you'd like to do or what you're doing in session. Keep it pretty short, and we'll open it up for questions. Thank you.
I like to, you know. I'm an old guy and I have to have notes. I know this young man doesn't have to have notes, so he's all ready. We were very busy. I represent Marietta and Hoyt. This is my 9th year, and if you would read the good paper here, we had some kids from Willow Valley, D. Pages. What's nice about junior high kids, when they come there, their eyes are all big and they're well behaved for junior high kids. I taught junior high kids for 37 years at Oskaloosa, so I like junior high kids. Unfortunately, they're like pups, you've got to keep an eye on them. But anyway, no, they had a good time and they did a great job for us. I'm on the health committee, also the transportation and safety, which is sort of like a budget committee. And I attend the rural caucus, so I like to hear about farm issues. Anyway, oh, by the way, I walk Marietta and Hoyt, and all over the place. And I never met, I'm sure there's got to be a bad person, but I never met a bad person. I didn't get dog bit, except I did get licked by 2 labs. So the dogs are friendly down there too, the ones I met. Anyway, I co-sponsored a veterans bill that basically says if you are 100% disabled veteran, you get a 75% rate on your property tax. So I co-sponsored that with a guy from Leavenworth, Pat Proctor. Also, King Corbett and I sponsored a bill that if you are 65 years and older, you can get a combination hunting and fishing license at a discount. I think it's up to 50%. And that was when it was on a time limit of 10 years, and it ran out for that bill. So we introduced that bill, but we added, if you're 5 years old or less, someone can buy a lifetime hunting and fishing license for $300. And if you're 6 and 7, it's $500. You can buy a 6 or 7-year-old. It passed the House and it's going to the Senate. So I thought that was a good idea. 2327, no foreign ownership of land that's 100 miles close to a military installation. So we thought that was a good idea too. This is one that I thought, why do we need it? But they said we did. It's 2004. Citizens only vote. It's an amendment that only citizens can vote in state and local elections. So the reason for that, it wasn't anything clear in our Constitution. So we wanted to make it sure that citizens vote in our state and local elections. I guess in California and some eastern states, that they were trying to get non-citizens to vote in their local elections. I want to make that clear. One that I introduced for the Attorney General, Steve Anderson, he's an Inspector General. If you win more than $5,000 at the casino, it's reported to the Kansas Internal Revenue Service. He's also going to have to be reported to the Kansas Department of Health and Education. And to make sure that if they're on Medicaid, getting government insurance, they'll have a 3-step program, first time, second time, and third time, that they'll be reduced. And then I ask, what about the kids? They're on a, poor kids or kids in need are on something called CHIP, Children's Health Initiative Program, and they will not be affected, only the adults. So if they're in the casinos, and they're on Medicaid and winning $10,000, $20,000, it will be reported to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Also one introduced by the Inspector General is 2217, expanding the power of the Inspector General to investigate reported abuse in cash food health assistance programs by the government. If it's a fraud or crime, they would like to have the ability, if they have the information, to go investigate that. Right now, it's being investigated by the Department of Children and Families. It's about a $5 billion expense for the state. One that I was going to carry last week, and I walked in, right as I walked in to talk to the calendar, that's where we meet, it says, by the way, we pulled that bill. It's 2159, and the reason for that, of the expense. They're cutting back on all the expenses we can. I think you guys can elaborate on this, and it's a good thing. No taxes on Social Security. I kind of like that, but it's reducing money. Also, we don't have taxes on food, which is reduced money, so we're trying to make our budget balanced. This 2159 would allow police officers to carry Narcan. Ed Klump of the Sheriff's Association came to us, and it's Narcan reverses the effects of opium overdoses, like fentanyl you've heard about. So I've talked to a lot of people, and right now some police officers can carry it, but we want to have an ability that they'll have liability, so they will not get sued, and minimal requirements. I talked to Atchison Public Schools, and they have it. Their school nurses have it, and it's donated by like the Lions Club and other organizations. And let's see, it's going to expand what they call the Good Samaritan law that we passed last year. It was $500,000, and I assume they're going to take it away, and we're just going to ask for donations. I talked to a police officer at a doings that I went to yesterday. He was from Chicago, south of Chicago, and all their police officers has it in their cars and on them too. It's a spray, a nasal spray. It costs about $50 for 2 doses, and it will stop the effects of a fentanyl overdose. I know in Leavenworth, they said they had 36 overdoses, mainly young people taking something that they didn't know that fentanyl was in it, and they had almost half of them was fatal of that. So the good faith and reasonable care is in the bill at this time. You have to be trained to recognize the effects of fentanyl, how to administer it, and how to store the drug. The drug will be good for 4 years, and it's a nasal spray. So anyway, research is, I've looked it up, and we've had testimony that if you give it to someone and they're not in an opioid case that an overdose, it doesn't hurt them. So I think I'll stop with that. Oh, one more. You know, we have several hundred bills, and I have to take notes. Now, if you were junior high kids, I could just do this real easy. Anyway, this bill passed 94 to 25. It bans contributions of foreign nations to support, defeat, or propose amendments to the Kansas Constitution. If we have a proposal for an amendment to the Constitution, a foreign nation or anybody that represents them can't give money to one side or the other, whether they're for or against it. We had to pass that. So at that time, I will stand for questions later. Thank you.
My name is Sean Wilcott, representative for District 62, which is Nemaha, Brown, and northern Jackson County. So really the area here, the newspaper covers a lot of the folks up in my area, so I'm happy to be here and kind of represent myself and introduce. You can tell I'm the rookie because I don't have a whole list of notes in front of me, but wanted to come introduce from it. The three committees that I've been assigned to on this one, when I went into and ran for office, my focus or my main intent when I went around and introduced myself to the folks in the district was really focused on a couple of key topics. One was taxes. That was the number one topic that you hear out on the campaign trail, or taxes are too high. Small business was another area that it was more near and dear to my heart as a small business aspect of things. So focusing on pro-small business, kind of cut back some of the regulations on small businesses to help promote growth there. And then security, so border security, election security, things of that nature was another key one. So I was fortunate enough that the committees that I'm assigned to are federal and state affairs, commerce, and then social service budget. And so I've had the opportunity to listen to a number of different topics in those committees that kind of go back and roll back into what we ended up doing or what I heard on the campaign trail. So in Fed and state, some of the areas that we had listened to on that were some gun control bills, or we'll say loosening gun control bills on that. One of them primarily that we ended up passing out of committee was associated with concealed carry permits. So if you are allowed in the state of Kansas, you can get a concealed carry permit at the age 18 preliminary. It's kind of at 18, we allow you to have a concealed carry permit, but that doesn't necessarily roll into all states around the country. So we have a provisionary, that's what I was looking for. So Kansas has a provisionary concealed carry from 18 up to 21, but it's good for 5 years. All other states, most other states start at 21. So Kansas allows a concealed carry permit that's rotating to other states at 21, but there was a loophole in that in the statute that was kind of unforeseen until somebody ran into it, which is if you have a concealed carry permit at the age of 20, you're not allowed to get your concealed carry permit that's rotatable in other states until 4 years later. So we worked at the Fed and state to kind of change that or correct that issue, where we end up having a provisional of one can be renewed at 21, so you can get issued a new one at 21. We recommended that to the House body. I believe we did vote on that this week. Also in conjunction with that bill, law enforcement that carry firearms throughout areas, some institutions have been requiring them to record a lot of personal information, and then we're identifying paraphernalia on them. And so this law is going to protect the law enforcement as well, where they no longer have to have identifier when they go into those locations as law enforcement. Commerce Committee, some of the things that we ended up working on there, very pro-small business. We've heard a number of things in commerce, ranging from something a very specific industry, like the bee industry, bee and honey industry. We worked a bill, recommended that. It got kicked up, and we ended up passing that out of the House this past week. That's going to help reduce some of the hurdles and constraints that the honey industry has for your local honey farmers. Try to help promote that. We focused on a number of other topics around small business. One of them that goes back to the reducing tax or reducing expenditures is one that's associated with low-income housing tax credits. Came out of Commerce. And this is a tricky one. This is one where you want to be able to do to help promote your local communities. Housing is a big topic in all three of my counties that I cover. But this particular tax credit that's been out and about, basically, when it was passed a number of years ago, the price tag on that was not really realized at the time, and what it ultimately trickled down was putting the state of Kansas on the hook for about $250 million a year, every year that program was in place. And so we worked on that and tried to go through. We ended up finding that it's probably going to be easier to end that program this year and then come back in the future year to try to find better ways that are more fiscally responsible for the state's pocketbook, but as well promoting the low-income housing, which is an issue in a number of the communities. So commerce, we worked on a number of those items, and then social service budget, as you can imagine from the title by itself, is a very challenging one. It's a huge committee that covers a lot of budgets around social services. Being first year, I can't tell you the way budgets have been done. I'm not an expert on how budgets were done in the past. This year through the legislature, we were working on budgets in committee and then rolled it through out of legislature. So some of my colleagues up here may be able to give more detail if need be on that one. But we worked on in the social service budget, going through a lot of the budgets around ADHE, KDADS, DCF, pretty much anything social service related. Going through those different agencies, working with them to try to highlight and identify the critical areas. One of the areas that we worked really hard for and were successful on the IDD waiver scenario in the state, that there's a huge backlog for the individuals that are needing that. So we were able to work successfully to try to put some additional funds to help that community and the individuals on that area to help drive that wait list down to be more manageable. So again, I don't really have a list, but those are the areas, kind of the primary focus of where I'm at. Have been meeting with a number of folks, both down at the Capitol, and I get a lot of phone calls, so I'm fortunate enough on weekends or evenings to be able to talk to and always have an open ear. So any area of interest for folks, I'm happy to listen.
Thank you. I'm Senator Craig Bowser. It's a pleasure to represent you in the state Senate. I want to thank the Holton Recorder for this event. I've probably been here 5 or 6 years in a row. I love this event. I think it's great. So thank you, Holton Recorder. Thank you, folks, for being here. I always say our republic doesn't work unless its citizens participate. So thank you for being here and participating. It is important that you're here, and I sure appreciate you being here. We'll talk about some of my priorities and some of the committees I'm on with the bills that I have sponsored. I'm on the Agriculture Committee, which I really like that. My district is, I should probably remind everybody, my district has been misreported slightly in the Holton Recorder because we redistricted. My district includes all of Atchison, Donovan, Jackson, Brown, Nemaha counties. Parts of Marshall County no longer includes anything in Pot County. We've got northern Jefferson County, and then I've got a little bit of northern and northwestern Leavenworth County. That's the district, Senate District 1. I'm on the Ag Committee, Judiciary Committee, which keeps me very busy. We had, I think 18 bills introduced in one day. Local government, and then utilities committees. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm very busy with those committees all day. I've got a couple of smaller committees, tribal relations, which is very appropriate for this district since I've got the tribal reservations in the district. We haven't met yet, but I'm looking forward to that committee meeting, and then and that's a joint committee. And then I'm very pleased to announce that we finally have a Senate Veterans Committee. I don't know why, I don't know the history behind it, but we didn't really have a full-time Veterans Committee in the Senate. I'm happy to announce that we have one now, and I'm a member of that committee. My priorities are, again, as Representative Wilcott mentioned, tax reform during the campaign. Property tax reform is probably the #1 issue. So that's my #1 issue, and I'll talk about 3 bills, 2 of which I've co-sponsored here in just a second. I've also would like to see our state tax code simplified. You might remember a couple of years ago we had 3 tax brackets. Now we're down to 2. Really like to see us get down to about 1 if we can. Let's see if we can simplify everything. I want to protect children. I want to, as Representative Ellis said secure land from foreign adversaries, especially China. I don't want those groups buying land around our military installations. We've got 3 or 4 very important installations here in the state: Leavenworth, Riley, and McConnell Air Force Base. We've got Forbes down in Topeka. So don't want China buying ag land around those facilities. And then I also want to try to make our state government more efficient and effective. And we've created a committee on the Senate side, an efficiency committee. I'm not on that, but I think they're doing a great job, and they've got a great way for you to report if you know of fraud, waste, and abuse in our state government. There's a great website where you can go fill out a form, and they will investigate your idea. So please take a look at that. Some of the bills that I have been working on with regard to property tax reform, I said that was the #1 thing. We passed 3 bills out of the Senate. I co-sponsored 2 of those 3 bills. One is Senate Bill 10, and it was actually requested to us by the county appraisers, and it would eliminate tax on things like wheelchairs, motorized wheelchairs. Did you know those were taxable? They were taxable under current law. We're proposing to change that. Snowmobiles, motorized bikes, side-by-sides, all of those under this bill, that tax would be eliminated. The county appraiser said it's just too much work for us to try to chase this down. Let's just do away with it. So that was Senate Bill 10. It's over to the House for their review. Senate Bill 35 drops the state. The state used to collect 1.5 mil property tax so that we could help state universities with their building maintenance and building repairs. We have Senate Bill 35 drops that 1.5 mil collection by the state. That would help your property taxes go down. And thirdly is Senate Resolution 1603. This is a proposal that would come to you, the voters of the state, to amend the Constitution, but it would limit our property tax increase to no more than 3% per year. I think the House has a version that they're working on. The Senate proposed 1603, the House has a version. Hopefully we can work out some compromise, end up somewhere in the middle of something that will benefit everybody. But again, those 3 property tax ideas came out of the Senate. I co-sponsored 2 of them. I heard you when you said we want some property tax reform. Agriculture, I'm pleased to sponsor. I'm happy I sit on the Ag Committee, and I also co-sponsor the Senate Bill 36, which increases the amount of money distributed to our conservation districts. This is good for our environment, it's good for the ag industry. Our conservation districts around the state do a wonderful job. Anything we can do to support them is going to be good. We've got great people that work there. Those conservation districts are in all of our counties in Kansas. They're normally located with the NRCS folks out there, and they just do great work, and I'm happy to support the work that they're doing. I want to talk about unclaimed property for a minute. You would be surprised at the number of people in our state who have unclaimed property. The state treasurer is trying to hunt these people down. They've asked for our help. I've been working to contact people throughout the district. Go to the state treasurer's website and make sure you don't have any unclaimed property, because you'd be surprised. A lot of people do. Could have been you rented an apartment, you put down a deposit, you moved, and they don't know how to get the deposit back to you, so it goes to the state treasurer's office as unclaimed property. It's your money. It may be a deceased relative of yours. Could be a variety of reasons why that property is unclaimed, but there's a lot of money out there. It's your money belongs to you. Please go check and see if you can reclaim some of your unclaimed property. Finally, I want to talk about 2 things. One is Senate Bill 118. I co-sponsored this. This would apply term limits. I'm a term limit guy. I don't intend to be in politics for the rest of my life, so I believe in term limits. I co-sponsored Senate Bill 118, which has term limits on it. And also, yeah, I think that's it. I'll sit down, let Francis talk to me. I look forward to answering your questions.
Senator David. Francis Evercamp, I represent the 61st District. In many years past, always enjoyable to come to these events, give an update on what we are doing in Topeka. So 61st District includes the city of Holton, more the south, northwest corner of Jackson County and the more rural part of Potawatomi County. So I live in St. Mary's. My wife Shannon and I have 7 children. I brought 3 with me today, Madeline, Juliana, and Anthony. And last year was a great year. Shannon and I were very happy in September to welcome our little baby Isabella. So Isabella Michelle, beautiful little baby girl. So it's an active household, and certainly, with every child, there's a special motivation that comes along with it, right? We've got a great future. I want to make it a great future. That's one of the reasons I am in Topeka. I also have a lot of nieces, nephews, friends. Got another niece getting married next weekend. Right? We see these young couples getting married, having children. There's great hope in their lives for the future, and it's so important that we keep that in mind with all the work we do, all the policies we analyze in Topeka, and try to push forward. So in Topeka, this is my 9th year in Topeka. I'm on the same committees that I was on my prior term, which are energy, utilities, and I also chair the Welfare Reform Committee. So I'll talk about a few of those bills hopefully today. It's really neat to be a chair of a committee because really the speaker gives us a lot of leeway. He says, you're the chair, you decide what you're going to work on, and you schedule it out and make it happen. So it's been tremendous over the last couple of years what we've been able to accomplish on the Welfare Reform Committee. And we just passed our 3rd bill across the House floor this year. And like I said, we'll go over that a little bit. And then my 3rd committee that I'm on is tax, the Taxation Committee of the House. So I can talk a little bit about some of the tax policies we're considering. Just real quick, we were called back into special session last summer in June by the governor to pass a tax bill. And really we passed the same tax bill that she vetoed many times. It was just slightly altered. But it was overall, I think, a very good bill. What did it include? Just real briefly, we increased the standard deduction for those who do not itemize. We also increased the personal exemption for pretty much everybody takes the personal exemption on their taxes. And then we changed from a 3-rate income tax bracket system to a 2-rate. We also lowered those rates. We increased what's called the property tax exemption amount for residential properties. So we all have a home. On a home, the state has a 20 mill levy and a 1.5 mill levy. Of the 20 mills, there's a certain amount of your value of your home property that is exempt from that 20 mills. In the past, it was about $42,000 and change. The bill we passed in special session increased that to $75,000. So we increased roughly $33,000 of your home value is no longer taxed by that 20 mills. So there's a little property tax relief element in that bill. And there's a few other small details in that special session tax bill, but it ended up decreasing taxes by somewhere in the ballpark of $400 to $450 million a year. So that was a bill passed last June. So we're looking at a lot of tax policies this year. Happy to, I'm sure with questions we'll go through a lot of those. As far as where my focus is in Topeka, first of all, we have to respect the law of God. If we don't respect the law of God in this country, we're not going to last, right? You go back to the founders. Our country is built for a moral society. If we don't have a moral society, we're toast. So we have to defend the law of God with all of our policies in Topeka. It's so important, and definitely that's on the forefront of every single decision I make. That comes first. After that, certainly the family, defend the family on every policy we look at. And then we take a look at just the overall constitutional rights of the people of our state, so the people of the district. Are we protecting your God-given and constitutionally protected rights? Very important. We don't want to infringe on those, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those policies that we're looking at as well. And then the last one is just the function of government. We all pay taxes, and lots of them in Kansas. So our government must function efficiently, effectively, and honestly. And so we're analyzing the policies to make sure our government works correctly and doesn't take advantage of the power that it has to send money to special interest groups. And we've done a horrific job over the years with some of the policies that I fought against for many years, and unfortunately got beat on a few, and now we're starting to see the effects of those policies on our budget. Two real quick comments about constitutional amendments that we're looking at. The first one is judicial reform. I can go back to 2016, the little flyer that I handed out, when I was campaigning, I am for judicial reform. We fought for it every year. I think we've got the votes to pass it this year, and it would be a constitutional amendment. This is worth listening to. To some people in the legal field, they say that if we can get this passed, it would be one of the most important things in our lifetime. Okay. When the state was originally formed, we had a judicial election process, so that the Supreme Court nominees were elected by the people. In the 1950s, it changed to what's called the Missouri model, and the judicial selection process was modified so that there's a board of 9 members that pick 3 nominees for our state Supreme Court. And they send those 3 nominees to the governor. And the governor gets to pick 1. And if the governor doesn't like any of them, then it's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court that gets to pick it. But if we go back to, let's talk about that 9-member board that picks those 3 candidates. Who's on the 9-member board? None of us. There's nobody that's elected by the people of Kansas. 5 members are elected by the Bar Association, the lawyers. 4 members are appointed by the governor, and they're appointed on a cycle. Okay, so we have 5, the majority is by the Bar Association, and then 4 members of the governor, which is kind of operate on a time cycle. So really, who's appointing these Supreme Court nominees? Unelected lawyers who really don't have to be accountable to the voters. So we have what many very intelligent people who understand this stuff say, we have the worst or second worst Supreme Court in the United States. Second only to California. I think we have the Supreme Court, which has been overturned more by our U.S. Supreme Court than any Supreme Court in the country. Even to the point of, I think, is Ruth Ginsburg, right? She's not a conservative Supreme Court justice when she was on there. She even wrote in one of her comments when she overturned the Kansas Supreme Court how atrocious their decision. It was an insult to our Supreme Court just because of how liberal they are. So we do need to change the process of how we appoint our Supreme Court justices, and that's what our judicial reform bill, I think we will be able to pass this year, will do. The next one, I'll try to be a little bit briefer, is a constitutional amendment on rules and regulations. This is kind of a little bit of an interesting situation in our country because we have a legislative process, we have 3 branches of government, but there's a 4th branch that's kind of creeped in over the years, and it's called the agencies or the bureaucratic branch of government. And the agencies are often given a little bit of leeway to write rules and regulations to implement the statute. Problem is, they take that leeway and they stretch it, sometimes really far, to where they are creating new laws, essentially, through their rules and regulations. And there's different Supreme Court cases that say, actually, they're allowed to do that if it's not defined tightly in statute. So the only way we can really control some of the rules and regulations is come back and pass a whole new law to say, no, you agencies, you cannot hurt the people of Kansas in that way. So the constitutional amendment that we're looking at simply says that the legislature, through a concurrent resolution, can nullify and stop any rule and regulation. Why is it more important to do it just by a concurrent resolution? That's just a simple majority vote in the House and the Senate. We can stop any rule and regulation. That doesn't have to go to the governor, right? So we're not changing statute, we're just stopping an agency from getting out of control. I would like it to go a little bit harder, a little bit farther, but that's the policy that that committee kind of pushed out as far as the Constitution Amendment. It's good, especially the ag community, very much in favor of this constitutional amendment, because sometimes the agencies create some very burdensome rules and regs on farmers and ranchers. So take a look at those this year. I think both of them. We just passed the rules and regs constitutional amendment over the House floor a couple days ago with supermajority, which is what is needed. And I think the Senate will easily have supermajority, so we'll see that on the ballot. Probably primary election of next year. Stop there. I look forward to questions.
Sure. We will open up to questions at this time. So if you'd like to raise your hand, we'll call on you. You state your name, and you can direct your question. Yes, sir.
Jay Sims, they're in Jackson County, of course. Good question. You told us what the current way we elect we get our Supreme Court justices. What is it in the proposed?
Okay, great. I'm sorry, I skipped over that. All right, so so there's two ways that we're looking at, and I'll go over both ways, and I'll tell you which way they are going to push the Constitution Amendment through the legislature this year. So the two ways are the federal model, which is the governor nominates and the Senate approves. Personally, in a lot of ways, I like that one. I personally like that one a little bit better than the other one. The second option is a popular vote. And I have not seen the language specifically on how that process works. More than likely, what the language will say is our Supreme Court justices will be elected by popular vote of the people, and the legislature will determine the process on those elections. So we'll pass a statute that basically says, hey, here's how those elections will work. I mean, it'll be just like electing a governor, very similar to that. So that's the one which all the polling and the popular appeal, that one seems to have more interest than going to the federal model. So I would say, I'm not 100% sure that's going to go through the legislature this year, but I'm about 95% sure that's what we're hearing in the Senate. I think it's going to start in the Senate, and they still have not sent that over to us, and then we'll send it to the House. But it'll be a popular vote method to determine on our Supreme Court justice. I have not read the specifics of the language, but it's possible that we won't even put the specifics in the Constitutional Amendment. We'll leave those up to statute.
Follow-up question to that. What are other states doing in this regard? If our Supreme Court is supposedly so bad, what are other states doing to put it in context?
Yeah, I think we're one of just a few that have our current process of nominating Supreme Court justices. Most of them, I should be able to remember because I sat through 2 presentations on this, but I would say that the majority of the states have a popular vote, and then a significant number have kind of a federal model, and then there's a few states that have kind of just their own version of variations of that. But the super majority of states are either a popular vote or the federal model. So this is what's very common around the country.
There's kind of pros and cons to each one. And when they told us we were going to go to the Missouri model, that should have been our first clue that this is a really bad idea. But for some reason we did. There's pros and cons to both. If we go to the popular vote, then the Supreme Court justices sort of become politicians. They have to run for statewide election, and you know, you probably more tend to get biased that way than if you went the other route with the governor nominating and the Senate approving. So there's a little pro and con for each way, and I thank Representative Auerkamp for bringing that up, because that's going to be a really important issue for us to decide as a state. And thanks for bringing that up.
Yes, ma'am.
Overall, I have a great concern for our country and our state as we disrupt our 3
divisions of government. And you mentioned bypassing the governor. Tell me the benefit in bypassing the governor and just the House or the Senate making the decision.
I think you're talking about the rules and regulations, constitutional amendment, bypassing the governor. Okay. So it's not really bypassing the governor because we're not passing statute. So if we're passing a change to statute, okay, that has to go through the House, the Senate, and then it goes to the governor. And if the governor vetoes, we can override her. But this is not with regards to statute. This is regards to agency level rules and regulations. We currently have a rules and regulations committee that meets to go over all the changes to rules and regulations, but they have no ability to stop or change any of these. They essentially get to listen and rubber stamp. A previous representative from Wamego, Ron Highland, great guy, he was chair of the rules and regulations, and he wanted to stop a rule and reg. He couldn't. So he came up with another fun tactic. He says, well, I tell you what, either you're going to go back and change this, he told an agency, you're going to go back and change this rules and regulation because it's very abusive to the people of Kansas, or we're going to plan months of meetings and we're going to go through every single line of things before we sign off. So it's not a way to go around the governor specifically because it's not a statute change, but it's a way for the legislature to pass something to stop an agency from implementing rules and regulations, which is against the spirit of the statute. So we pass a statute, which is very clear. The agency takes it way beyond our intent. So we can pass a concurrent resolution to say, no, that rule and regulation doesn't go into effect.
But the concern here is that so many voices are not being accounted for. It's just, we've divided ourselves as a country. So it's either an R or a D. And we're missing the commonality, and we're missing the interest. And we're also, I'm concerned here about not keeping it separate state and church. So there's a balance for our country and a balance for our state.
I guess I'm not quite sure what you're referring to because R&D, yes, we have Republican and Democrat, but if you spend time in Topeka, you will realize there's a ton of crossover on the issues. I voted with Democrats on issues, and Democrats have just voted for bills that came out of the Welfare Reform Committee. There's a lot of crossover, and as far as God and country, once again, God exists. We're one nation under God. We are formed on those basic principles. So if we leave those, just like our founding fathers,
Not leave them, just acknowledge that there's a separation. That's the way our Constitution was made.
No, our Constitution says that the government shall not choose a state religion. And Mr. Auerkamp is not saying that Kansas is choosing a state religion. So that's the separation, and it's been established pretty clearly.
That's what the Constitution says.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Annie Brock. What I'm hearing, you guys, what I'm hearing is a real death of expertise in Kansas. So you're saying, we don't want the agencies, the Health and Department agency is staffed with health and environmental scientists. The Department of Agriculture is staffed with great people who came out of K-State's agricultural program who are educated on these issues. We've heard the voices of doctors and scientists quelled on a number of issues, especially like regarding trans kids in Kansas. I'm hearing you say that barred attorneys shouldn't have a say in the legal system in the way that they do. But you guys are sitting out here saying, you know, I'm hearing a lot of, well, I haven't quite read that whole bill yet, or well, you know, I'm not real sure, or well, and I'm sure you guys have expertise in whatever your area is, but it makes me uncomfortable as a Kansan to think that people who don't have expertise in areas, because I value education and expertise in science and medicine and other areas, it upsets me to hear that you want to consolidate power to yourselves who don't have expertise. And I'm going to give you an example of that. In September of 2012, I gave birth to a stillborn baby. And she had a condition called Turner syndrome, which is a sex chromosome disorder. She was born with an X0 chromosome, meaning 1 chromosome. So she would have been born with no female reproductive parts, undeveloped testes, which are ovaries in females, and also male features, such as facial hair, a thick neck, other things like that. So I know for sure from talking with my doctor that happened. That there are people who are born with different hormonal orchestrations and configurations, with different chromosomal configurations. XXY, called Klinefelter syndrome, is another way that people can be born with different chromosomes than XX and XY. And this is just one example of what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing you guys say, like, oh, we don't want the experts to weigh in on that. We don't want the people who study this, the people who tested it, the people who read the papers, write the papers, to have the say. We want the final say. And yet, you're very loosely describing these things. You're admitting, like, well, I haven't quite read that, or I don't really know what's all involved in that. And I'm hearing like such vagary, like no specifics, no concrete expertise. So as a Kansan, I guess my question is, why are we trying to take authority and decision making away from the people who have expertise and consolidate it into whoever a county elected?
So one of the important things is to make sure we tell the truth. So I'm going to explain a concept. If I haven't read the exact language of the bill, I'm going to tell you that. So as far as the experts, you know, there seems to be on a lot of issues, experts on one side and the other. I've got a person who graduated from Harvard Law. The person has been practicing law for over 30 years in Kansas. He's an expert, in my book, and he's saying that to change the judicial selection process is one of the most important things we can do in our lifetime. He's an expert, so we are listening to experts, but they may not just be on one side of the spectrum. The other experts, as far as rules and regulations, are the people who have to live and work and deal with those rules and regulations. They're the ones that have to shoulder them. They're the experts because they're out in the field. They're not just the ones behind a desk in Topeka who think they know everything and they can just write science into policy. No, we're listening to the people that actually have to deal with the science and understand the reality that's going on out in the world. And they're pushing back against essentially leftist policies coming out of the government.
What's the example of someone in the field being harmed by a scientist?
I've been in agriculture my whole life. I'm 50. I know a lot more than someone that spent 4 years in college.
You seem to have a lot to say, but I want to hear from my elected officials. I appreciate your opinion, but I want to hear from you.
You said you want to hear from experts.
What I'm hearing, I do want to hear from experts, but this is on the topic of expertise. And what I'm hearing is that the scientists who staff the Department of Health and Environment don't know better than you guys. That the people who are running name the agency. What I'm hearing is anybody who has expertise is put in this bucket of being a leftist or whatever you're saying. But in reality, shouldn't we be valuing expertise? I mean, what is it? And I appreciate you have the one guy who went to Harvard Law. I would like what are the preponderance of experts saying? Not what one guy that you know is saying.
Thank you. You're very passionate about that, and I appreciate that. I value your input, and I'm not saying we know everything or that there aren't experts. I will give you another example, though. We have a new proposed Secretary of Parks and Wildlife. Okay, this gentleman is nominated by the governor, but his background is not in Parks and Wildlife. So he has come on board and he's been the acting secretary for, I don't know, I think 9 months now. And the people in the field, the experts in the field are telling us, they're telling us, this guy is not a good fit for that position. We need a different selection here. So just another example of, we listen to, there are experts, there are great experts. We have very valuable state employees that are experts in certain fields. Our Department of Agriculture, for example, is wonderful. They do a great job. K-State University has been doing some exercises on bird flu and something called PT, pulmonary, I don't know, some complex disease similar to bird flu. K-State does exercises on what are we going to do when this thing comes to the state? How do we respond? And those are great exercises. They work in conjunction with the Department of Agriculture. They're very valuable to our state. It is going to be our state's response, not if bird flu comes, but when bird flu comes. So we do value those experts, but there are quite a few different occasions, Parks and Wildlife guy, for example, where it's just, that person's not a good fit. So I see another question. Thank you for that. Yes,
To kind of somewhat change topics, but back to that, what was not discussed today is I wanted to know why you guys voted against the special education budget. And then if you guys did, do you guys have any firsthand knowledge, or did you talk to the expertise or special ed staffing before you made the decision to cut? Or did you guys look at the numbers and just look at papers? So I would like to hear why you guys voted against that.
I'll try that. Nothing like taking a notice. You're right. You're right. It was proposed at $30 million, and what we were offered was $10 million because of the less money that we have. I think it would be great to have $30 million as a former teacher. And you're right. Special ed needs that. We gave them, we put in $72 million last year. It's going to be the same this year, the same $72 million plus another $10 million. And it's still not enough. You're right. And it should be. But with all the cutbacks in my transportation and safety budget, firefighters, police officers, a lot of different organizations, we only allowed repairs this year. That's why. Mainly because of the less money that we're receiving right now.
But isn't it more important to put budget into education and for people that can't advocate for themselves and for their future versus hunting license, firearm regulations, and all of that?
Yeah.
Not can't help.
Like I say, it's what was offered. We voted for it. There's a man from Salina was going to propose a bill. And he was told we can't afford it. But the people who offered that amendment wanted to take it out of a fund that was going to try to attract businesses in Kansas. And I remember some people said, well, try to take it out of another fund. It's called PAYGO. If you spend money, you have to replace it with something else. And the people that proposed that amendment didn't want to do that. It's still not too late. Maybe they can take that, but I totally agree with you. Special ed needs the money. And if it's offered to us, I'll vote for it, but it was offered to us for $10 million extra on top of the 72.
Who do we go to find out how they put that vote up? Or
It's on Kansas legislature. Yes.
.ks.gov.
Right.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Please state your name.
Mary Jo Kearns, I live near Valley Falls, and Mr. Ellis is my representative. I'm wondering, if you can't find the money, how do you manage to pay tax breaks to parents who want to send their kids to private schools, which then pulls in money away from public schools? When you take in fewer taxes, because you're giving money, basically tax money, to parents who send their kids to private schools. And by the way, I don't believe there's a single private school in our district. I may be wrong. But it seems to me that we would not need to support public private schools or the parents who want to send their kids to private schools, when we are still unfunded with special ed.
I'll go in first. I don't think we did give money to private schools.
Not
Vouchers.
No.
You want vouchers.
I didn't vote, hey, wait a second. I've been blaming, I've never voted for any of those things for the history of I've been there. If you don't watch my voting record,
Thank you.
I never
appreciate
have.
that.
Because there's no accountability, they're not state accredited, and they don't show results.
I'm glad you know that.
I'm glad to hear
Well, you
that.
should know that too, since you live in Valley Falls. But I get some of your emails, and I want you to know, I've never done that.
Well, why didn't you respond?
I want to set the record straight.
Well, I'm sorry that I had to come to a meeting after 3 years to find that out.
I'm in Valley Falls quite often. Of course, you're never in Pine and Repair, or at the other Pine and
Well,
Plumbing.
I appreciate that you're not voting for vouchers or.
Well, there's no
anything like that.
accountability. There wasn't any accountability. They're not state accredited, and they don't show results.
Okay.
So, there you go.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Amy Eisler, I'm the Director of Special Education for the Holton Special Ed Co-op, and you guys all represent every district in my co-op that we provide special education services to. We provide services to multiple counties. I sympathize with the people that are speaking out here to help support our kids. I would invite any of you to come to my office and sit down and go through my budget with a fine-tooth comb. We run a very lean co-op. 96% of my budget goes to pay for staff. Staff that provide support, the needed support to our kids. If I don't have that staff, the kids don't get their services. The message that's being sent right now, you are to pay the excess cost, 92% of excess cost that our districts can't pay for. Right now, we're hovering in the 70s. Even when I figure in the LOB proportionate share for special ed that was written into that additional 72 point whatever million last year, it still does not even come close. Our districts are still anywhere from 62% up to 85%. So we're not even cutting it close. The additional 30 million this year was supposed to be an additional 72 million. It got cut back to 30 million, then cut back to 0, then negotiated back up to 10. So the figures I'm giving you right now include the potential share of that additional 10 million for this year. That's still a significant shortfall. So when 4% of my budget in the co-op goes to curriculum and materials and supplies for our teachers and staff to be able to provide the necessary services to the ever-increasing population in special ed with severe disabilities, where do I cut? Do I cut people? Because that's what you're asking me to do, is to cut staff to make my budget even leaner. When I cut staff, guess what happens? That goes to unemployment. Guess what happens there? The unemployment rate goes up. We start paying unemployment support. So you're not taking away expenses. You're increasing a burden just to another area. So one, I want to thank Representative Auerkamp and Wilcott for voting down House Bill 2007. Thank you for doing that. I truly hope that now that it gets turned over to the Senate, that you kick it back for revisions to fully fund special education. Because you are hurting. When you want to talk about Christianity and God, we are here to support the least of these, correct? That's what we're challenged to do. I'm a Christian. That's what we're challenged to do. That's not supporting the least of these. So I challenge you in the Senate and as representatives to talk with your senator, your colleagues, and encourage them. Kick this back. This needs to be revised and reworked. We need more funding in special education. When you guys first talked, I didn't hear one person talk about education, and it seems like education is always the last thing to talk about, the last thing to solve, the last thing to decide what we're going to do with funding. It comes down to the wire. And we're sitting here with our budgets waiting until the end of June trying to figure out what are we getting for money. So I beg of you to please consider that, because I think that if you looked across the state in our special ed budgets, you would find that other agencies are running a very lean budget just like me. The majority of our special education expenses are in our people, not extra things.
Yeah.
I have just a question back. Education is not, and I admit, it's not my expertise personally, and I'm not on the education committee. You commented that, where you were gonna have to make tough decisions with people. Has your budget been cut this year, last year, year before? And this is a true question, I don't know. I mean, we're talking that it's,
So special ed budget works completely different. I don't get to generate mills, I don't get to generate funds coming in. My only access to funding is from state aid, federal aid, and then giving assessments to the districts. So the districts are responsible for sending us money to support special education. I can't cut, I can tell you that I've got a trend, and that's why I said, I'd welcome you to come and look in and see my budget, the trends over, I've been director of this co-op for 9 years now. And I have kept our assessments very stable to decrease, not decrease, but to keep it at a very minimal increase. There have been years where we have decreased. But those decreases are usually because we have vacancies and can't find the staff to fill our positions. So, again, please come and look. I would love to educate you on special ed funding and our budgets and what we're actually doing so that you can see how we're providing services to the schools in all of your districts to show you that we are running a very lean budget. If I cut, I'm cutting people. And I cannot. I cannot cut people. We've got shortages. We need more, not less. We've got severity in our school districts where we have to have not one, but 2, and sometimes 3 people to support kids due to the severity of the disability. So and if I cut again, then you're talking about me breaking laws when it comes to a free, appropriate public education and what IDA calls us to do in making sure that we fulfill the services in students' IEPs.
Yes, sir.
Trevor Ashcraft, I'm the superintendent for Holton, so I work with Amy very handedly. I just wanted to share that perspective on the general education budget as well. So last year, we transferred, our expenses for the district were $1.1 million. And the revenue that we actually brought in state aid was $600,000. So out of our general education budget, the funding that is supposed to impact all students at large, we needed to make a transfer of $477,000 to be able to cover those excess costs for special education. That then means that we have $477,000 that we're not able to use for either staffing or curriculum needs for our neediest students. The least of these are at-risk students. We end up, therefore, focusing more of our time and energy on trying to remediate and prepare for state assessment, which is not a true, fair depiction of what is the knowledge base of these students. I want you to truly consider and understand that we have 6% of our population who are English language learners. So they need to take the English language proficiency assessment every year. Those students who were determined as not proficient in English are then also required to take the Kansas assessment. So now we're double penalizing that group, and it reflects in our state assessments. We understand that we have a lot of work to do. We need to improve those scores. We need to serve the students better. Unfortunately, we don't have the staff and the resources to be able to do that, but then we're also looking at skewed data, because that information is indicating that our students weren't proficient, but then we asked them to take an English-based test to determine whether or not they understand the content. That impacts our overall scores. It's the same way for our students who are at risk and that we're trying to serve with those limited at-risk dollars to be able to get them to the point that they are on an equal playing field with their peers. Those assessment scores are always going to reflect lower because we're not able to impact them in the way we need to, because the funding now needs to be reallocated to cover a required amount for special education, because those are federal requirements, but that means we have to take from somewhere. That requires the rest of our general education to do the very best that we can to serve the needs of those students. So I would also encourage you to come see what we're doing in the school district, and I appreciate, I've reached out to 2 of you, both of you have offered to do that when we're not in session, so thank you to Representative Wilcott and to Senator Bowser. I would encourage Representative Ellis and Representative Auerkamp to also come and spend some time with us, look at what our districts are doing in terms of our teaching teams, looking at our instruction, what are the plans we're trying to do to improve the outcomes for our students, specifically for the least of these, the at-risk and the special education.
I wanted to ditto, I think that's the first time you guys heard thank you, and I know being in the public, I don't know being a public servant has to be very challenging for each and every one of you, so thank you for doing that, and thank you for coming, listening. There was one House bill that passed that looked like House Bill 2246 on price transparency. I don't know how each of you voted in the House. It was 80 to 42 vote. Half of it was struck out, which I appreciate. Price transparency is regulated at the federal level. It seemed like it's one more layer of regulation that is unnecessary. So as it comes to the Senate, please be sure and look at it. We've already added costs and resources to meet those regulations at the federal level. I'm not certain why the Attorney General is pushing that forward to be regulated also by the state.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple of questions, Louie and Beth's. One is for Sean and the other one is for anyone that can answer. I know that when the Kansas lottery came into effect, the majority or all of the revenue from that was supposed to go to education. How much revenue do we receive from the Kansas lottery, and how much of that is actually going to education? The other thing I have for Sean regarding the lower income tax breaks, would it not be better to come up with a new plan before you eliminate the current tax break system?
So on this particular one, on the low-income housing tax credit, and I'll go into a little more detail on it, and we can pull it offside if we need more than that. Currently, the federal government gives a specific 9% and 4% cost tax credit from the federal level. This new program that was enacted 2 years ago, Kansas matched that for 10 years. And so the intent on that was, okay, we'll match it for 9% and 4% for 10 years. So the builders, the developers were getting, in essence, an 18% per year for 10 years tax credit. And so when you start looking at the math of that, you go, wait a second, there's 180%.
So it's the builders that are getting the tax break and not the...
It was the developers, so that the structure, you have a developer, you have a builder, designers, it's a whole tier system with it.
So it's not the actual low-income people that are getting any tax break?
So what ended up happening on that program, when you did the math through it, so over the last 3 years, there was between federal and state tax credits right at $1.5 billion worth of tax credits that have been assigned to those, and there's a total of 6,600 units that have been set forth for that particular program. So now when you do the math, it ends up being $226,000 worth of federal and state tax credits per unit that has been assigned to that. So when you take a look at where's that money come from, that's directly coming from the state revenue. I mean, that is a credit that's coming from state revenue. So it's not all tax credits. There's a number of other programs that are still in existence that specifically for rural development that stay in existence. What this was identifying one specific one that appears that it has gone way above and beyond what the intent of that incentive was. And we've heard from a lot of different builders to say, okay, instead of continuing this on at such a great rate, we have other programs in place. We need to stop this one because of the size. And then if we need to readdress and come back, we can come back at a smaller, more affordable size.
And then the other question about the lottery and the revenue that we make from the lottery.
This is only what I think. They were promised that, and somewhere along the line, before I got in there and all of this, it goes into the general fund.
Because
Is
I'm
that
pretty
what-
sure that when we voted for the Kansas lottery,
I
we were
totally
told
agree, totally
Yeah.
agree.
it was gonna go to education.
I know.
How do we get that back?
Yeah, how do you get that?
That sounds like a regulation overreach.
So the 1980s, I believe. I wasn't voting in the 1980s. That was when the Constitution was changed to allow the state lottery. And yes, that was one of the selling points. The way it currently is in statute, whether it's changed or not, I don't know, but probably gave the legislature flexibility. So I spent years in the Fed and state. That's where they review the lotteries deal, all the numbers. I think the first 50 million goes into the Economic Development Initiative Fund, which goes to a lot of different economic development initiatives, from college research centers to, it's a list of, I think, about 30 different entities receive that $50 million. And then anything over that will go to the state general fund. Going back a few years, trying to remember all the numbers. I think the lottery itself might bring in around $72 million a year. And then in 2012, there is called the Lottery Expanded Lottery Act. It's an Expanded Lottery Act. That's where the casino industry hired some pretty lobbyists and lawyers to try to find a path to allow casinos in the state of Kansas. And because the Constitution says that the lottery will own and control gaming in the state of Kansas, the way they were able to work in the casinos is by allowing the lottery to own and control the games within the casinos, and then contract with casino owners to build the facilities and operate the facilities. And then the Kansas Lottery gets a certain percentage of the profits of those casinos. And it varies, the percentage varies slightly, I think, with the 4 casinos, but I think this Kansas Lottery gets somewhere around 20-ish%, 22% maybe, of those profits. And that's not a tremendous amount of money each year. I'm going to roughly guess somewhere around $60 million a year. If I can recall correctly, the whole package is about $120 million, but this is going back a few years on those numbers. And then 2 years ago, I think in 2022, 2.5 years ago, the legislature passed a bill to allow sports wagering in Kansas. That was a bill for 3 years. Several of us fought back against that bill because there's 3 routes that bill could go. 1, nowhere, or 2, it could be run by the Kansas Lottery itself. And the third one is it could be run by the Kansas Lottery through the casinos. And if it was run through the Kansas Lottery could then contract with the sports wagering entities, kind of like FanDuel or basically the apps, and most of it's done online. They can contract directly with those. If we would have gone down that route, of the profits, the state would have probably gotten somewhere around 60 to 70% of those. Unfortunately, this is a direct quote from what was said on the House floor when we passed the bill. The person carrying that bill said, hey, I gave the owners of the casinos access to this bill and they wrote it. So the owners of the casinos wrote the bill that ended up passing. And what was decided and passed by the legislature was that the casinos would then run the sports wagering and the state would get essentially 8 or 10% of the profits, most of which go to specified funds. Large percentage goes to the attracting, well, not a large percentage, but a certain percentage goes to attracting a sports team. And the state gets a very minimal amount I think of the $2.3 billion wagered in 2024, the state general fund actually got $11 million. If we would have gone the other route, going through the Kansas lottery, at about a 9% hold, which is the profit, the state of Kansas would have got 60–70% of that. So you do all the math, we would have received into the state general fund somewhere around $150 to $170 million. So right now we're getting 11. We should be, with sports wagering, getting about $150 to $170 million. Terrible policy. We fought very hard against it. The contracts are up for renewal in 2027. And right now, there's another state rep that I office with. We were both working very hard against that policy a few years ago. We're trying to stop the renewal of the contracts with the current process. And we're trying to pull back away from letting the casinos run it. And then we'll try to get it back to the Kansas lottery so the money actually goes into the state general fund. Because right now, all those profits, they go to Las Vegas. Right? That's the casinos that's sending all that money outside of the state of Kansas.
So how do we get just the lottery piece of it back to funding education? Like it was
It would be
supposed
a change of statute, which would then take all that money away from the EDIF, Economic Development Initiative Fund. We've looked at that several times, and essentially the chairs of that committee say that that will never happen.
So who's the chair?
And now, well, currently it's Tom Kessler, before it was John Barker.
Who? Who is it?
Currently it's Tom Kessler.
Kessler?
He's a good guy, but there's leadership oversight, and there's a lot of control on the federal and state affairs. And you can imagine with all the money and the lobbyists. Like for instance, on that sports wagering here, they hired somewhere around 28 lobbyists to protect the casinos. The casinos are making.
I mean, I feel like we were lied to when they said the money was going to go to education, and it's not, obviously.
Yes, the way, yes, you are correct. The process now has been dominated by the lobbyists for the last many years. So the money is getting diverted, which we were fighting against. Unfortunately, we lost that, but we have a chance in 2027 to make some big changes, and we're working on that right now.
Could I answer that lady? Representative Allerkamp spoke against that giveaway and calendar when we met, and also on the floor, that we both voted against that giveaway, that we only got. When he spoke, everyone was quiet. They listened, they didn't hear.
Yes.
And we didn't
Yeah,
vote for it.
that's a big problem.
It is, and you're right, it's a giveaway. So anyway, he gave a great speech, everyone listened, but they didn't hear him.
But I did have a Democrat who voted for that bill. He came up to me while we were on the House floor, another debate, Francis. I should have voted against that. You were right, the numbers you were talking about, they've come to fruition, that was a bad bill. And a lot of people are seeing the numbers. The numbers are so obvious. They're so obvious. We know we have a terrible situation right now with sports wagering. So I think there's an appetite to revisit it and change it. Which you think about that, that's about $150 million a year to the state general fund, year after year after year. But right now it's all going to Las Vegas.
We can't afford that.
It's very frustrating.
We can't.
But we're working to try to get that back.
I'm Matt Mayor, I'm chair of the Republican Committee here in Jackson County. I'm not sure if is the Democrat chair in here?
Right here.
Okay. Gentlemen, it sounds to me like we have some bipartisan support, at least in Jackson County, to get that lottery money back to our schools.
Yeah.
And if I'm hearing you, $1 billion worth of that's $1 billion of Kansas money. It's just gone. So Republicans in the room, do you guys support that? I mean, that money should go to the schools? I agree, that's what the citizens voted for. But anyway, that's one. Thank you.
I have a comment. I pulled up the Kansas
Sorry,
Lottery website as you were speaking. You did a great job of representing what they have on there as far as where the money comes from, how much they were, and how it's distributed. I didn't see anything about education in there. There's general funds, problem gambling, addiction grant fund, that no economic development, I didn't see anything about education.
Yeah, and that was the big selling point.
Right, that's one of the
when we
reasons it
voted
passed.
for it was gonna go to education, and
You have a super majority, so shouldn't that be an easy fix? I mean, if everyone agrees, shouldn't that just be an easy fix?
I mean, can you not create a bill and put it to the vote again and say, this is what's gonna happen this time?
Yes.
Okay.
We've got this back.
So we are in the works, the representative of our office with. Yeah, there's a lot of emails back and forth with the legislative research in the revisor's office. One of the problems is when the casinos write the legislation, they have lawyers who do this across the country. They know how to write it to protect their interests, to where if we
But
change statute.
correct me if I'm wrong, the casinos
casinos
aren't in charge of the Kansas lottery.
I agree with you, and that's why I'm kind of explaining this process a little bit. But the way they write statute is to protect their interests, so that if the state comes back and changes something, they can sue the state. This is one of the reasons why that piece of legislation was so bad, and we fought so hard against it. So right now, we're working with the research department of advisors to figure out what are the options to end that contract with casinos and the back lot.
Francis,
So
is that
there's no
typical? That a party that stands to gain a lot
Right.
writes the statute or writes the
Special interest.
rules?
It was one of the most atrocious bills I've ever seen worked across the House floor, and I can tell you the backroom stuff that went along with that. That was, a lot of it was done in conference committee, and you take a look at who's profiting from it right now.
Sure.
It's,
But is that typical?
no, but because of the amount of money at stake, in the amount of, if you want to look into this, the New York Times wrote an article back in 2022. It was called "Bars, Cigars, and Sports Wagering in Kansas." And Eric Limpton, he came from the New York Times and sat in my office for about 45 minutes. I showed him all the numbers, I showed him all the data, I told him exactly what was going on. He interviewed a bunch of other people, and he wrote essentially it's a 17-page editorial on what happened. And he exposed the whole thing and how dirty it was. If you get time, and it's easily available online, go to the New York Times. Eric Limpton did a very good job. He wrote about it, and it kind of put a damper on a lot of those lobbyists. A lot of the legislators who were involved in it lost their next election, rightfully so. But yeah, it was one of the worst bills. Probably, I would say it was the worst bill I've ever seen across the board.
So, I mean, it's something for this body of people, Democrats and Republicans, consider. Is there potentially any time an entity that stands to gain a lot writes the rules that they have to abide by, we're not going to be the winners,
Right,
right?
right.
Yeah, and that's where the legislative process, like, there's a lot of people writing.
But whether it's the Kansas
process-
legislature or the Jackson County Commission or a city council or whatever, if the people that stand to gain are writing the rules, we're probably not going to be the winners. Obviously, they're going to pay their $1,000 an hour lawyers to write the rules to their benefit.
But that's where the legislative process needs to represent the people.
Right.
And so if they've got 20 lobbyists down there at the State House,
We got time for a couple more.
we need to bring our people down there together.
My name is Mark. I know we're running out of time. I just have two topics I'd like to address, and whoever might want to. One is healthcare. If there's anything that might be coming down the pike to maybe cause the needs of healthcare, and also housing, specifically affordable housing. That is one of the top needs in our community. I'm involved with a lot of that, and I see it every day. And I won't take much time to explain, but I'm just curious if there's any insight of maybe things that might be in the works on those two topics.
One thing is sort of related. The legislature put a little bit of money in on Medicaid reimbursements. but it was so little, it didn't make any difference. And you can comment on this. I believe that Tara May, the head of the Kansas Hospital Association, told us about 2 weeks ago that every time the doctor, dentist, or hospitals get reimbursed, depends on the different levels, but it's an average of 18% loss. Every time you bill for a medication, that needs to be fixed. And I talked to several people in the hospital association and medical, they're gonna try to get more money, but getting more money is difficult. Because am I close on
For the
Medicaid?
18% loss?
Yes,
Um,
depends on the situation.
It depends where the setting is. In the hospital, it's probably spot on.
And we've heard from dentists and doctors that they want to help people, but some of them are saying, we might not be able to afford to help those people because of the state Medicaid reimbursement is so terrible. So that's what we're trying to do. I'm trying to get as many people, hey, let's put more money in there.
The Medicaid provider assessment tax that's been discussed to reimburse the providers more. I think getting up to that 6% match would be very, very critical for us to.
And I know at the hospital in Winchester, we'd be just fortunate if we would just break even. So, you know, we could actually serve people. But anyway, that's.
I'll take this second.
Amy, do you have a question?
I just wanted to say that you guys have to the education piece and the lottery and all of that. It sounds like you've got an excellent opportunity right now to unify Democrats and Republicans to come together for the sole cause of education in the state. And you would have such a large number of people behind you supporting you in that.
Yeah.
So I just feel like you've got a golden opportunity here to move forward on an issue like that would receive so much overwhelming support.
Thank you, David. I don't know if it was last year or 2 years ago when the forum ended and I was on my way out and David thanked me for holding my tongue. I'm sorry, I can't do it 2 times in a row. I do want to thank you and Connie for hosting this. Without taking time off and going down to the Capitol, our representation is limited. Call people on the phone, oh yes, I'll tell you. So thank you again for doing this. Mr. Wilcott, you closed your business. Do you still live in Jackson County?
We do.
Okay. There's 2 others. 2 of the 4 that represent Jackson County actually live here. I just have a couple of comments. Judges getting appointed. Do you really want our judges to be running for office, making their rulings on who's going to go vote for them? I think it's fine the way it is. Obviously, you don't have much respect for attorneys, which is sad because they know.
That is not true. That is not what I said. I said the process does not work well. The process actually is very poor, and you can tell that by how many times our state Supreme Court has been overturned by the United States Court and what their comments were. The process needs to have the people, the elected process involved. If we don't respect our system of government and all this is done behind closed doors, it doesn't work. They have to be accountable to the people right now. It has nothing to do with whether I respect attorneys or not. It has to do with respecting the rule of law and our system of government.
Well, they come up on a ballot, whether they want to be retained or booted out. So there is a little bit of give and take there. Also want to comment on school funding. I do not want my tax dollars going to private education. People want to send their kids to a private school, fine, you pay for it. I know teachers that are having to take money out of their own pocket to buy the supplies because once the baby's born, we don't want to educate them, we don't want to feed them, we don't want to house them, we don't want to give them medicals. I just find this, and now I understand that maybe you're all going to try and go through the back door to get the abortion amendment criminalized. So, and someone had the audacity to say that we didn't understand what we were voting for in that election. The Republicans tried to stick it in the primary, were notoriously low voter turnout. We had record turnout for that, and you were told what the people of Kansas wanted. Why don't you listen to your people and not just
abortion is murder.
No, it is
You were
not.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
And
Laura is not in mine.
I will never support the killing of innocent children.
Will you please tell me why you poor men think you can tell me what I
Yeah.
can do with my body?
It's a child.
Properly cared
Abortion
for,
is
it's a
killing a
child.
child.
Well, and that's okay.
So a D&C is abortion. A D&C is taking care of AIDS.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm going to take
Lunch is there, right? Like,
Sorry.